by the same token, I know it's a little bit of a cliche now to say it, but I think the Barbie campaign, I thought, handled the tone perfectly. I mean, it was, obviously it was a pitch perfect film and really entertaining, but it also, like, the campaign, it's such a, it's such a simple thing. And I think I saw a lot of armchair quarterbacks going, oh, well, everyone did what you would have done. And it's like, well, no, there were choices that were made to do the campaign exactly the way it was done. And it was so savvy and it was so fun, and everyone understood the cultural moment that was happening. Obviously Margot Robbie understood the cultural moment that was happening and really, capitalized on that and exploited it in the best possible way. And it felt fun. It felt inclusive. It felt joyful. And it didn't feel like it was alienating anyone. Like, sometimes you do a campaign that feels like you're talking to one audience and one audience only, and you're kind of alienating someone else in order to do it, or you're making assumptions about audiences. And I felt like that was a very inclusive, fun, and welcoming campaign. And obviously it did pretty well at the box office last year. So.
You're listening to Creative Leadership with Heart, a podcast that inspires people to take action and be the leader they were born to be. I'm Coach Rico, and I'm known for coaching and training executives, leaders, founders, and high performers at Fortune 100 businesses, startups, and more. I'm here to answer your questions about leadership and personal development while also asking you questions that can unlock your untapped potential.
Oh no, it's already recording. Okay,
Here we go.
I just had to keep hitting record, so yeah, we're ready.
Okay, so that's all out of context. So hi, my name is Leonard Samuels. Welcome to another great episode of Creative Chutzpah with Rico Nazal, our co-host, and our star of the day, Glenn Sanders. No relation to the Colonel himself. Glenn is SVP of Global Creative at SVP of Global Creative at Eclipse and former Amazon Senior Creative Director. Glenn, it's great to have you on. Please tell us about yourself and where you come from and your whole arc.
Well, thank you for having me. It's really exciting to be here. I love conversations about creativity, and I think this will be a lot of fun. So I'm currently at Eclipse Advertising out in Burbank. We do entertainment marketing primarily, and I'm SVP of Global Creative. This is my boomerang move. I was there a few years ago before I went to the client side. I spent about almost 5 years at Amazon Studios as Senior Creative Director, worked on a bunch of different titles there. Lord of the Rings, Jack Ryan, Jack Reacher, a few other things.
All the Jacks,
the Jacks and the Harrys, Harry Bosch as well. That was the other one. And before that, I was at Netflix on a contract role for about a year, in a variety of capacities. And then prior to that, I was at Eclipse again, and then Trailer Park before that, and traditional advertising before Trailer Park. So I've kind of hit all the notes. I worked, at Chiat Day for about 6 years. I call them 2 tours of duty. And I, again, boomeranged, left and came back after about a year, and, got to work on Nissan, Infinity, PlayStation, got to do some stuff for, so a little bit of stuff for Apple early in the time I was there. And then also like Pepsi and Gatorade and all the stuff that Chiat touched back in the day. I got to work on a little bit and really got trained in advertising from that place. I call it the mothership because literally every opportunity that's come into my life from an advertising perspective has happened as a direct or somewhat indirect result of having been at that place at that time. So
I'm so curious in terms of like traditional advertising. What is that process like? Because you're working on one piece for such an extensive amount of time versus like the quick changeover for, TV and film.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because I got in through the digital team, or what we called, interactive team at the time. And so I didn't know really anything about advertising. I wasn't trained in advertising. I got in almost by accident through a friend of mine who had gotten promoted, and I didn't have a job. And I was like, well, what did you do before? He seemed like he was having fun. And so he had me interview with his boss, and they're like, well, we'll give this guy a shot. And so I came in for 2 weeks and ended up staying there for 6 years. It became a whole new life that I never expected to happen. I know, seriously. But the difference is that, I think that the world of entertainment marketing is very different now than it was when I started. So entertainment marketing, when I first started, was very tactical, and there wasn't a lot of strategy behind it. And what I learned, and I didn't know, is I learned all about what is strategy, how to develop a strategic plan, how to work with strategists and planners, and like data. Again, not knowing anything about advertising whatsoever, and then how to tell a story across all different media. So we would have, pitches and presentations where we'd be in the basketball court at Chiat Day, and you'd have these large gator boards, and then every group that was doing different stuff would put their work up on the gator board, and then the creative directors would walk through, and they would write check marks, usually throw things on the floor and then walk over them. Most of the stuff ended up on the floor in a big pile of shame. But what you found was that you were telling a sort of like hero story across all mediums, that's what we were all going for. And that once we found that, wherever that came from, that could have come from the TV side or the print side at the time, or even the interactive side. And if that core idea aligned with the strategy and really made sense and said something different about the brand, then you would take that story and you'd expand it out into all the mediums, and everybody would kind of fall in line with that. With entertainment, it's typically you already have that idea, right? You have the property, and so a lot of times you're really just chasing the tone and the style of that property. But when I came into entertainment marketing, I really came at it from a traditional brand marketer in that sense, because by the time I got there, I had done a lot of TV and print as well, in addition to the interactive stuff. And so I tried to bring strategic thinking into these pitches that we were doing for banner ads for a movie or something like that. And people would look at me like, are you insane? This doesn't make any sense. And little by little, those became kind of the standard by which we were judged. If we were bringing strategy to the table, our clients would expect to see that more and more. And I think it's because there was a filtration of traditional advertising creatives into the entertainment marketing space. I saw strategy become more and more important. And I think now today, you're seeing a little bit of a pendulum swing back to a little more tactical based thinking. But I think that's the result of, that's usually the result of a little bit of chaos and fear. And so people don't necessarily want to be trying to tell a big narrative in a campaign because they're afraid, like, if I don't just get a bunch of TV spots out or billboards or banner ads or social content. And so it's a little bit disjointed, but I do see now increasingly the pendulum is starting to swing back, and we're getting asked more and more. It was happening within Amazon, where we had kind of pivoted away from like big idea storytelling within a campaign. And then in the last like 8 or 10 months that I was there, maybe even a little bit longer, there was an increased focus on doing that, like telling a story within a marketing campaign. And now I think that there's a movement because there's a recognition that the audience has to understand what a property is, kind of what is the heart of a property, and not just like action scene or funny line or something like that. And so I think we'll see in the next year or so, as hopefully things stabilize a bit within the entertainment space, I think we're going to start to see a little bit more expectation of strategy, storytelling, narrative, and things like that, connective tissue. So
yeah, that's great insight. And a quick follow-up on that is, where do you think that fear, you said like there's little bit of chaos and fear to like have big storytelling. Where do you think that comes from? What do you think? Like, where does that come from?
We are swimming in the ocean of chaos right now. It is never, I've been, following the entertainment industry for as long as I can remember. So that's a very long time. And I've been in the entertainment industry in various capacities for, I don't know, since easily the late 90s, if not earlier. I've never seen it this chaotic in terms of lack of understanding or knowledge of what's going to happen next. I think there's a lot of fear. There's all the layoffs, which is horrible. And I think nobody really knows. And there was the strikes. Nobody knows what's going to happen next. And in a time of uncertainty, I think people naturally retrench to tried and true formulas. No one is going to get fired by putting out like 2 really good trailers and a bunch of cut downs. No one is going to get fired for putting out social content that is following a social trend that's existing right now, or is just another cut down of the media, or is leveraging, let's say, an influencer with a big following to connect those two things together. Where I think people get into trouble right now is when they try to do things that are maybe too out of the box and it's a little bit too much of a risk. You could take a risk 10 years ago on a maybe smaller, title, or even a bigger title with kind of weird, funky, off the wall content, or activations or microsites or things like that. Whereas now I think people are more scared that a risky decision in the marketing will lead to a risky outcome in the actual property itself, that no one will come to watch it on streaming, or no one will come to the theater, or buy or rent it or whatever. So
yeah, that's super interesting. I haven't spent as much time in entertainment as you have. My entertainment career lasted about 9 years. All of it was on Netflix.
That's a lifetime still.
That is a grain of salt, right? Take it with a grain of salt, because it was all on Netflix. And we probably did some work together, because I lived in a creative studio.
Oh, nice.
But that is interesting, right? Because, like back then, even in technology and Netflix and all those things, we were super into risk, right? We'll try anything different. We'll tell crazy stories. We'll innovate on these titles and try different things. And I have seen that trend, even from, folks that are still there, they're taking less risks. So now that makes sense to me, where that fear comes from. And hearing you, because you're dealing with it on a day-to-day basis, I haven't been in that industry for the last 2.5, 3 years. But it does make sense. So yeah, that's crazy that you're seeing that manifest in that way, where the layoffs, the uncertainty, the strikes, and all those things. That tells me that it's right for somebody to come in and just come back to big storytelling and big risks, because that's likely what people are yearning for. They're the doom scrolling, or whatever you want to call it. If you're flipping through you're going to get a lot of the same stuff. Yeah. So whoever's willing to take that risk might have an opportunity.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. And I think it's about the calculated risk. I think at one point I would have gone all in on certain titles on big swings, so I'm just thinking about Ready Player One, I think that was a movie that had a hard time connecting with audiences, but from a marketing standpoint, we were ready, and the studio was ready to take some big swings and try some stuff. I think now I think it's about being a lot more calculated about that, and making sure that, you have your bases covered, but you're also kind of chipping away at the edges. And then as you see that, what I always hate to see is when you try something really original or innovative and there's no support for it, and then it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. So the people who don't want to support those things will sometimes say, they will point to the lack of success of something and say that doesn't work, but they're not taking into account the fact that it wasn't necessarily supported, whether that's with additional paid support, or the right kind of PR partnership, or just an institutional lack of interest in trying new things. And I feel if you have the right mix of elements, you can go all in on something that is off to the left. I often call it unexpected but inevitable, where it feels like a thing that you really anybody should have been able to think of, but nobody did yet. And nobody actually made it. Nobody did it in the right way. And I think that's, but you have this overarching campaign that surrounds it, that keeps it safe, so that can be an experiment. And then if that blows up, you're golden, you're great. And if it doesn't, you're not really risking all that much. There's definitely, reputation, you're worried about did that go over well? But also you're not really risking a huge audience if you do something that's more of a calculated risk. And so that's what we try to do, is, think about it in those terms.
Yeah. And then it's omni-channel, right? So it's not your bases, like you said, your bases are covered. So it's not you're going to take risks on every single channel in the same way, right? And
I think social media is always the best thing. Look, every campaign is now almost 100% social anyway. That's where, all assets live and die for the most part. But you have, opportunities, within social, I think, to take those calculated risks in a way that does not necessarily destroy the momentum or the value of the rest of the campaign.
Has there been a campaign that you've seen in the past that just really resonated with you, regardless of the budget? Just, something that just feels wow, that feels groundbreaking to me.
I mean, in terms of overall marketing campaigns, I feel and hate to bring up one that I worked on, but I did work on it, although I wasn't central to the first one, which is the original Deadpool campaign, where the risks that were being taken were, I wouldn't say they were necessarily as calculated as they were like, we're doing something no one's ever done before. We have a fan base that is, I would say, like nobody in the mainstream really knew who Deadpool was. And the hardcore fan base was very concerned about what was going to happen with that character. And so the studio took the risk of I'm sorry?
It was an amazing campaign.
It turned out great, but we were all, we're talking about it now in light of the new Deadpool and Wolverine campaign. And we were talking about how like a lot of what we did then, you really couldn't do and you shouldn't have done. And we were like, we were kind of messing with the fan base and we were, but again, I want to sort of separate like, yes, that was a campaign that was inspiring, but that came from the leadership at the studio. They were willing to take the risk all the way up to the very top. They knew that they had something that they could take a risk on, and it wasn't going to play unless they did that. And that was the fun thing, is you could kind of go chaotic with it and do things that no one else had done before, as long as you were maintaining the right voice and tone of that character, and not going too aggressive. That character has a tendency sometimes to seem too aggressive in the wrong hands, and it also can be a little bit too kind of like saccharine or sweet if you go in the other direction, where it's a little too cutesy or self-referential sometimes. But in that threading of the needle for that campaign in particular, I thought it was really, really well managed, and I got to witness that as someone who was being able to participate in it and contribute to it, but not necessarily leading it.
Yeah, it was well done. It was just playful enough, just vulgar enough, but not like offensive. Yeah. So I think that was well done. And that's a great point, where sometimes, when you have the brand needs to go above some like data, because I think to your point, when pendulum swings, so no data versus data driven. And as creatives, I prefer to live in the data informed area, where we'll take into consideration data, but if you're too data driven, then data makes decisions for you. But if you're data informed, you're taking all that into consideration, but you now have brand, tone, voice, like all the things. Like if you missed the Deadpool brand and voice, then that campaign would have failed.
Yeah. Because the audience would have expected the wrong thing from the film.
And then the fans have been like, who the hell, this is not Deadpool.
No question. And I think too, like by the same token, I know it's a little bit of a cliche now to say it, but I think the Barbie campaign, I thought, handled the tone perfectly. I mean, it was, obviously it was a pitch perfect film and really entertaining, but it also, like the campaign, it's such a simple thing. And I think I saw a lot of armchair quarterbacks going, oh, well, everyone did what you would have done. And it's like, well, no. There were choices that were made to do the campaign exactly the way it was done, and it was so savvy and it was so fun, and everyone understood the cultural moment that was happening. Obviously Margot Robbie understood the cultural moment that was happening and really capitalized on that and exploited it in the best possible way. And it felt fun, it felt inclusive, it felt joyful, and it didn't feel like it was alienating anyone. Like sometimes you do a campaign that feels like you're talking to one audience and one audience only, and you're kind of alienating someone else in order to do it, or you're making assumptions about audiences. And I felt like that was a very inclusive, fun, and welcoming campaign. And obviously it did pretty well at the box office last year. So
I wanted, if Leonard, if we can, I want to take a little bit of a step back and get to know you a little bit, because we kind of jumped into
right in the meat of it.
Right. And so a little bit about you is, what is it about this industry, about creativity, that got you started? Was there a moment? Was there a campaign? Was there a movie you watched? Was there a poster you saw that you're just like, this is what I want to do?
It's all pure accident. No, I've been there actually is quite a lot of like just sheer like either good or bad luck depending on the circumstances, or middle luck. But I've always been a movie fan. I mean, when I was 9 years old, I saw Raiders of the Lost Ark in the theater, and I walked out of that movie like floating on cloud 9, and I was like, I need to be a filmmaker. Like that's what I wanted to do right from that moment. So I went to film school and I've studied film, and I've always been a movie and TV person my whole life, even when it wasn't necessarily cool to be that. And that has fueled my creativity throughout. And I think like, when I started and I got that sort of helping hand into the ad industry in general, it was, I think, very meaningful for me to understand that you could tell a story, a complete story, even in a banner ad. And I realized when that clicked for me, maybe a couple weeks or months in to my tenure there, I was like, oh, I can do this. Like, I can do this all day. And so then moving into the entertainment industry, again, it was partly because of my connections and friends I had made and colleagues I had made at Chiat that got me the opportunity to move over to Trailer Park. But it felt like the natural progression. Like I had done enough cars and sheet metal. I had sold video games that I can't play because I'm all thumbs and I'm terrible at video games. My son makes fun of me all the time for it. But it was like this natural progression to go from like, okay, I understand how to market something, which I didn't know how to do. And then I get into the entertainment space and I'm like, well, not only, I mean, these are my people. The fans are my people because I am a fan. I understand the language of this. I understand the language of the filmmakers. And so it's always been this progression, I think, closer and closer to sort of like, I don't know, like the center of the ability to creatively express myself in the most interesting way. And for me, it's always been in the entertainment space. And I'm a writer as well. I write screenplays and I'm working on films and stuff like that all the time. But
Hollywood writer, you must use, what is that?
I know a Hollywood writer working in entertainment somehow. I don't know how that happened. So it was just a natural kind of like thing. And, like I said, I really got lucky in that first job. And I did what I could to learn as much as I could from that. And I learned a lot about like just how to be creative, how to understand ideas, how to not be so precious about them.
That's a big one. How to not be so precious about them. So
I'd like, can we double click into that? Like, because that is something I think a lot of creatives have trouble with, right? And, I coach a lot of creatives, and it's the thing that they always feel is that their heart is out there. Like any piece of work that they put out is a representation of them.
Yeah.
And the thing that I always have to remind them is like, no, that's what somebody asked you to make, right? It's something that's trying to convince someone to do something. You're putting your craft and your years of experience into it, but this isn't your like masterpiece,
right?
And so, how do you decouple yourself from that and let go of that?
Yeah, I mean, like this is the core question, and I think the answer is that I would say you are putting your heart into things. I do think it's a representation of you, even the simplest thing that you put out there. You as creative people, I think we're infusing all of our work with the spirit of that creativity. And I think it's very difficult to disconnect ourselves emotionally and psychologically from the work that we do. I think when we start doing that, we run into problems, and the problems are lack of passion, lack of commitment, creative burnout and things like that. And I feel like the challenge and the sort of like invitation for a creative who's working for money is to be okay with being hurt and being embarrassed and being frustrated and being angry, and to try to let that stuff go and to try to move past it and to understand that like this feeling is part of the process. So you are going to put things out there that you think are brilliant and other people are going to think are not only not like, but actually be very dismissive and sometimes very insulting about. And you have to understand, you have to almost disconnect yourself from the reaction to the work so much as you are invested in the work itself. You have to, in a way, disconnect yourself from the outcome, because sometimes you make something and you pour your heart into it, and it's you yourself objectively look at it or subjectively look at it and say, oh, that's not that wasn't very good. I tried so hard. I did my best effort and I didn't do that great. And I think like that embracing of the uncertainty and the emotion of it, I think is so important, because that's, I mean, like more than many or almost even any other career, the output is us. If you look at the body of work that I've put out that is for other people, that is for other properties, that is for a car or for a movie or for a video game or whatever it might be, that's me in totality. So I can't disconnect myself from that work. And I'm incredibly proud of the work that I've done. And I'm also sometimes like, oh boy, that was a stinker. What was I thinking? So I don't know if I would call it advice, but the way that I've managed to cope is to try to understand that like it's all part of the process. I look at Francis Ford Coppola. That guy keeps going no matter what. He has had every possible disappointment and discouragement known to any creative person possible, and look at him. he's still putting himself out there. And so, I think if like those, heroes of mine from a creative perspective are out there and they're willing to do it, I mean, who am I to, stop just putting stuff out there in the world? So I don't know. Does that answer the question?
Yeah. I'd say so. And when you got your career started, what did success look like for you in the beginning, and has it changed today?
That's a really interesting question. I didn't know what I was getting into in advertising. I didn't know what my role was. I didn't know. I mean, when I say I was ignorant, I mean, my impression of advertising was like sitcom advertising guys in suits having drinks at the bar afterwards. Like not even as cool as Mad Men, just like, and so what was success? I mean, at the time I just needed a job. And I needed to do something, and I realized I could do something creative. And then when I looked inside, when I started to understand what was going on, what I felt was I could learn how to lead things creatively. Ultimately, the long-term goal is to become a director. Like, and as a creative director, I am certainly marshaling, sometimes very minimal and sometimes very vast resources in order to do that. And, different departments and things like that. And so for me, success at the end of the day is, I think, am I doing work that is creatively satisfying? Am I having an impact? Am I improving, like, am I helping other creatives or other people like improve their work and improve their like situation in some regard? And then, obviously you want to be making money at this stuff, but a lot of times you can't control that. So I think the main thing ultimately is, am I doing the kinds of things that I'm really excited and energized by? And if I'm not, how do I change the situation to get to that place where I am?
Yeah.
A follow-up on that, not necessarily what success looks like, but how has the job, the industry changed? You've been in the entertainment industry for 20 years, and you've probably seen a lot of stages and changes over the course of your career. What has changed? What has evolved? What has gotten worse? What are the things you've noticed over your career?
Well, we could do another hour on this alone, but succinctly, I think that there's a lot, like there's always been a sense of fear of like, can we get something made? Can we, am I good enough? Whatever. And I think right now, institutionally, there's just a lot of fear. I don't think that anybody really knows what's going to happen next. And that's the biggest change right now that I'm seeing happen. Something's going to stabilize at some point, for better or worse. And there's going to be the new now. Just like the music industry went through upheavals and now has a certain level, whether you like where it's at or not, there is actually a level of stability in that industry. It may not be paying people appropriately. It may be more of a, upper class, lower class kind of situation, but there is some stability and knowledge about like what happens day to day. And I think nobody really understands what's going on day to day. And I think less money is being spent in some ways and more money is being spent in others. And by that, I mean, to solve the problem of reach, they're throwing, tons of money at ad buys and like also budgets and things like that. And they're seeing that's working and not working. I mean, Twisters, which I saw this weekend, phenomenal film. I enjoyed the hell out of it. The audience was applauding at the end in the theater. Great experience. A few weeks before, I saw Furiosa. I freaking loved that movie, and it was an empty theater. So like you can't like nobody knows from moment to moment, and they're equally great films. I mean, there's no lack of skill or capability in those films, or even storytelling. So I think the difference now is there's more uncertainty than ever. There was a moment in time in the late 90s, 2000s, and even the early teens when you could really count on a certain type of revenue, particularly the home entertainment revenue, which was fueling, like you could fuel the mid-level hits or the mid-level like misses, and it was fine. And I think now we're just beyond that. And I think there has to be a new economic model. I think the ad-supported, certainly ad-supported streaming is going to level and I think normalize things, but it's so early that we don't even have a system for generating ads for it. So you'll see when you're watching, Netflix, Amazon, whatever, and you see ads, you'll see the same ad sometimes 3 times in one ad break.
Yes.
There is no system yet. So that's going to get normalized. That's going to get standardized. And I think then we'll start to figure out, as that money starts flowing back in, I think we'll start to see some normalization of the situation, but we're just in the middle of the chaos right now. So the change is way more chaos and way more uncertainty. I also think from a creative's perspective, it's significantly harder to break into the industry now than it was 20 years ago. Just overall, whether that's breaking into the entertainment marketing side, working at a studio in any capacity, because there's just fewer jobs, or even harder, like, the brass ring of actually making a film or TV show. It's just significantly harder now than it has ever been, probably since, the earliest days of film.
And coming from the agency side and coming from the studio side, are they constantly at war inside? Do you have like an inside out moment where they're just like arguing with each other, saying like, I want this art to go forward, but then you're like, the marketing needs to do this?
No, I mean, I don't see it that way at all. I see it as symbiotic. I think it's the studios really need the agencies, and the agencies really need the studios. I've seen how you'll see this, like, again, I talk about a pendulum. You'll see a pendulum go from like studios want in-house creative teams, so they'll bulk up on the in-house creative teams. But what the studios don't really get is that the agencies are basically taking on the risk that the studios can't. So if you had a studio that truly funded a creative shop that took care of everything in-house, it would be like 1,500 people. And I'm not even joking. Like, I've worked on this plan for places I've worked at where we've tried to figure it out. And then the number of people, because what you need is, you can't just have like 3 key artists to do, I don't know, 30 or 40 movie or TV shows, because you can't have an action key art person doing live unscripted key art. They're totally different styles. So again, I think there's a symbiotic relationship, and so what you'll see is studios will bulk up on in-house people. Then they'll say like, wait, this doesn't work, we need to go to outside agencies, or we're going to do a bunch of layoffs, and suddenly the layoffs happen, and this happens cyclically. And so in my experience, one of the reasons why I wanted to get on the studio side is to understand what was going on there, because I had a few instances where things didn't go the way I wanted them to, and it was very frustrating. And a little bit heartbreaking at times, actually, because you put yourself into the work. So I got lucky again and got in on the studio side, and what I learned is that everyone's just trying to do a good job.
Yeah,
I really don't believe. Like, look, there's people who are political animals, and they care only about their position in the hierarchy, and kind of screw everyone else. But I really do think ultimately, like, when we were having conversations about agencies during the strikes, when I was at Amazon, or during the pandemic when I was at Amazon, we would talk about, we need to spread the work. We cannot have these agencies go out of business. We need them. We need people to be employed in this industry, because we can't get our work done without them. So there was a concerted effort to make sure that agencies that we knew had good output and good people at them were not going to be left in the dust or go out of business. And you can't control everything, because the amount of volume of work we had was going down a bit by the end of the pandemic. And even during the strikes, obviously, there's quite a bit less work that happened. But our thought in one of the many conversations we had is, okay, owner of a shop, or like one of the, creative directors is like, I'm going to lose staff, or I have to, cut back, or I'm going to have to close shop. And we'd be like, what can we give them to keep the doors open so that we can work with them 6 months down the line, a year down the line, when things get back to normal? So I don't see there's always going to be tension, but that's just a natural part of agency client, process. And some clients and agencies are just better than others. Sometimes people are just nicer and easier to work with, or give better notes. But to me, I don't see there being, it's a very closely knit team. And there's a lot more cross-pollination now than there was even when I started on the studio side. It was very rare for agency people to end up on the studio side. And now it's like, half the people that when I left Amazon, half the people there were agency people who had gone into the studio side. So,
yeah, I wanted to know the truth. Sorry, go ahead, Rico.
That was the same thing with Creative Studio. Like, by the time I left, like, it started with just me, and there was 135 people, and most of them came from agencies.
Yeah.
And a lot of it was, and then just to get into the next question, a lot of it was they were trying to find balance, and they couldn't find that balance in the agency world. Yeah. And so they came studio side to the Creative Studio, and they found better balance, but then they just the thing that it was hard for me is they took those habits to Netflix, and I was like, why are you, it's like 8 o'clock, why are you still here? And that was hard to break. So one thing I wanted to get into was, if you have a comment on that, I'd love to hear it, but also how you created balance, and what did that mean for you over the course of your career, whether it's work-life balance or whatever balance means to you?
I don't know that you can have real balance. This is an ongoing conversation in my marriage, and I'm sure many people's. I mean, I saw when I was at Chiat, I saw a number of marriages fall apart while I was there, and I at one point, really had to make a decision to leave because my life was completely imploding. One of the I believe it was the when I was leaving, I think it was the second time I was there, I really left in large part because I needed to take control of my life again. And you're sort of in a place like that. You're trading, you go in there and that's it. That's the job. I think agency side entertainment, I think it's a little different in that, like, the passion for the properties can fuel it a little bit more. Like, it's hard when you've done, I don't know, 30 or 40 TV spots for different cars over the years. You sort of like, okay, it's another car, like, who cares? But when you get to a point where you're like, oh my gosh, this is, I grew up on Star Wars, or it's, Blade Runner, or whatever it might be, like, you get really excited and passionate about it. And I think the balance has to come from an intentional, like, setting some boundaries if that's possible. But really, again, I've been very lucky. I attribute a lot to my wife and son being, sort of capable of navigating the fact that, I have to work very long hours sometimes. And then if I'm not, I really try to be present as much as possible. But there's not really, I don't know how much work-life balance there is for anybody right now. And it's not just our industry. I think that people in America are being forced to do more in order to survive. And in our industry, it's like survival really means getting more work out the door. So
is there anything that you'd recommend in just kind of grounding yourself from the craziness that you have to deal with? And you just have to be,
I think the main thing is also having your own projects that you have control over. Yeah. I think that's really important for on a creative side. Not getting too wrapped up in, again, like, yes, you put yourself into it, but, like, the outcome is out of your control. So, and you're not, even though you're, again, expressing your passion and your creativity, it's not for you, and someone else ultimately has final say, and trying to be as okay with that as possible, even though it can be difficult. So for me, it's like, if you're a creative person, I had this conversation the other day with somebody, it's like the engine does not stop. I cannot turn off that creative flywheel that's going on inside of me. And if I'm going to get frustrated about something I'm doing in my day job that is not creative enough, I need to go home and be creative. And sometimes for me, that's like, my son is now, I've never crafted anything in my life. He's a crafter. He wants to, like, build things with cardboard and Dremel tools and, like, hot glue guns and stuff. And I'm, like, learning how to do all this stuff. But, like, there's creativity in just doing stuff that you can, like, build and make and put out into the world that is entirely yours, that no one else has any right to say anything about. And I think that's really important for creatives in particular, to have some kind of outlet for their creativity outside of it,
Right.
Yeah, it's crazy because every creative I know does multiple things. Like, whether it's, like, I do woodwork, I DJ, I do all kinds of other stuff. Just for, like, because one thing when I always ask people, like, creatives, is, what do you do for you? And I think it's important, and I'm glad you brought that up, because you don't have anything that's yours, then, like, what's your outlet? Like, everything then becomes work.
Yeah. Everything's for pay, and then you're and it's like, sometimes, like, you hope that something you do will actually make money one day, but yeah, for me, I mean, I'm like I say, I write screenplays. I've sold a few. I'm trying to develop a film for myself.
Casually sell a few screenplays while just.
Well, no, I mean, like, look, I came up in the late 90s with people who were doing mega sales. And I did not experience that myself. I came very close one time to a major sale and it just didn't happen. And then you kind of go on and you're like, oh, well, I get to go back to my temp job on Monday instead of celebrating my, buying a golden Ferrari the next day. So, that's quite humbling. But, and I'm writing, I wrote a short story that I'm trying to self-publish now. I'm trying to learn the self-publishing business and what that looks like, so I can put that out there. I mean, I'm not particularly good at, like, artwork or drawing, so I can't create, like, original art, which I wish I could. So for me, it's just, like I say, I can't, even with the scripts, I can't necessarily control the final output. If I'm selling something to a producer who has an idea about what they want to see change, we change it. There's still creative conversation, but if like for my short story, it's like I finished it to my satisfaction, and it'll go out to the word exactly how I want it. And if 3 people read it, that's totally fine. I put it out in the world, you know?
Yeah. You can take this question and you can answer it the way you prefer, but knowing what you know now, what would you tell your younger self about getting in industry, or what advice would you give to folks that are in or thinking about getting into advertising and entertainment creative?
Well, there's like multiple versions of my younger self that I look at. And so I think about this question a lot, actually, like how far back do we go to sort of like set that sliding door in motion? And I would say the number one thing is, I think when I was younger, in other words, like in my teens and early 20s, I was pretty arrogant about stuff. And had not yet been, beaten down by the realities of our world. And I would say, I kind of had an attitude about certain things, and I didn't say yes to a lot of things that would have made my life more interesting, better, more fun, or just like jobs and opportunities that came up that I would just be like, no, that's not really for me. That's not good enough, whatever. And then it turns out actually it was not only good enough for me, but I did not get, there were years in which I would not get a better opportunity that I had to deal with that. So I would say and I think that flows into now where it's like saying yes to opportunities. I had, as an example, about a year and a half ago, an old friend of mine from Schwartze reached out to me with an idea for an unscripted show. And he just pitched me the concept. I'm like, yes. Before he even finished, I'm like, let's do it. Let's figure it out. I'm like, I didn't have time. I didn't have energy. I didn't know how we were going to do it. I've never done a reality show, but I was like, let's just try to do something interesting. And I think that having a more open and kind of welcoming and accepting attitude about opportunities, and not being so certain that like I'm either better than something or like, that's not for me. Look, I could tell myself that from yesterday. I probably should have said yes to something that I was probably a little bit like, like dismissive of. So it's a lesson for myself to learn my entire life, but I see things improve when I'm a little more like open about stuff and just be like, yeah, sure, let's try it.
That's the right attitude. Why not, right? You just
I mean, what else do we have to do?
Exactly. What else do we have to do? Just try things.
The time is going to pass, like, we know this. And as you get older, you realize this. The time is going to pass whether you do the thing or not.
Yeah. That's a later thing. But once you're, when you're younger, you're just like,
yeah. You're like, I got plenty of time.
Yeah.
Young people, you don't have plenty of time. Get to work.
I think that's good on my end. Rico, how about you?
Yeah, one quick question, last question to close it out is, and this is your opportunity, if there's anyone out there you want to shout out, but who would you say, if you did or didn't, was the most impactful person or people in your career? And I know there's some folks you mentioned earlier that like helped open some doors for you, but who was the most impactful person in your career so far?
To me, like I think about like positive mentors when you see, the way people act in the world and, the way I behaved in certain circumstances where you're sort of like, oh, I could do better than that, or I can do better than myself. And I think a few of the folks who really had an impact on me go all the way back to Schwartze. So the guy who brought me in and took a risk on me, this guy, Nick Davidge, who's still a good friend of mine, who really changed my life just by saying, let's just try him out for 2 weeks. And he went to bat for me. And I didn't have a portfolio. I had like short stories and like, I don't know. And he got me in, and it completely changed my life. That's one. And then within Schwartze, Rob Schwartze was a huge impact on me. He's now on the East Coast. I think he's on the board of TBWA, but he was one of the creative leads there, and just like really welcomed at a time when digital was not important, really saw the value and really championed it, and really became just a very powerful force of leadership. And then the third one is a woman, Margaret Keene, who was my creative director when I came back, when I went to work on Nissan. And she was, number one, just one of the greatest creatives you could ever work with, but also to work for her. I mean, she was so warm and like inclusive and kind, you just did not, like, I had become used to and kind of gotten calloused by people who would yell and tell you your work is shit and tell you all kinds of, and insult you, or, or ignore you, or any kinds of thing. She did none of that. It was always just like, how can you do better? And you'd look at her and how she worked, and you'd be like, oh my gosh, she works harder than everybody else. She's smarter than everybody else. She's more creative. And like, I want to be more like her. And when she led things, everybody felt special. Everybody felt like they were included. And that, her and her partner, Chris Adams, together, the two of them they're legends within Chiat and Chiat history, but like the two of them were such a powerful force on my perspective on leadership. It completely changed the way I didn't know. I didn't know, again, coming into an agency, I thought, well, okay, everybody's yelling at everybody, so that's what we're supposed to do, right? But that's just not how you have to operate. And it's really how I've tried to kind of comport myself since, seeing her as an example. And I think those three in particular, and those are earliest days. There's a lot of other people since, but like they jump to mind as people who have just been so important to me.
Yeah, that's a fantastic point, right? Is, we modeled the behavior that we experience, right? And you were lucky enough to find great role models for you that showed you what it's like. Because yeah, you could have easily just been like, oh, crap rolls downhill, that's how it goes, I'll just like crap will roll downhill. But someone took the time and took you under and showed you the right way to treat people. And like, it's out there. And that's one of the things I want people to take away from these shows too, is like, there's humans out there. There's really good people in this industry. And when you find them, those are the ones you want to work with. So thank you, Glenn, for taking the time.
This is fun.
To sit with us and chat with us. Leonard, you want to close us out?
Yeah, well, it takes chutzpah to be creative.
Hey.
And thank you so much for your story. Really, my takeaway is just go out there and do the things that sound like they're fun, regardless of if you're in the early stages, if you're in your later years in life. Just if it sounds like fun, just do it. You never know where it's gonna turn into, manifest, and create itself. And thank you for really hopping on and taking the time to tell us your journey. And look forward to chatting with you more on another episode.
Wonderful.
So thanks again. And thank you, Rico, for hopping on with us, co-hosting on another episode of Creative Chutzpah. Have a wonderful rest of your day, everyone. And we'll see you next time.
Take care. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Creative Leadership with Heart. If you enjoyed the show, please like and subscribe. If you're ready to make huge, lasting change in your life, then what are you waiting for? What will your life look like if you took action today? What would it look like if you didn't? If you're serious and you're ready, book your free strategy session today, and let's make your future a reality.